speak with the Deputy Director of SERAP, Kolaole Oluwadare, who joins us via Zoom this evening on what the thinking of SERAP is constitutionally and in other areas. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Good evening, Coyote. I hope you can hear me.
Oh, yes, loud and clear. Now, let's take it in succession, because according to that open letter which you wrote to the president, you say it is patently unjust and contrary to the letter and spirit of the Nigerian Constitution 1999, the Pension Reform Act, and the country's obligations. Now, those are three issues you raised in your letter to the president. So let's take it in succession. First, how is this against the Constitution?
Coyote, thank you very much. You would understand that the president, as the chief executive officer of Nigeria, holds ultimate responsibility for the use of the resources of state, even as same is divided by the provisions of the Constitution through FAC allocations through the states and the local governments. So that gives him that power, even as provided by the office of the president, to control all things. I'm principally looking at the provisions of the Pension Reform Act, which is the principal legislation guiding the use and the accrual and payment of pension. You would see that section 17 of 5 says that the chairman of the National Pension Commission reports directly and solely to the president. And that it creates that sense of responsibility ultimately to the president in issues of national importance and economy.
Now, specifically speaking, because you also referred to the Constitution and the Pension Reform Act, saying that this is against it. So let's talk in the light of, the legislations. How does this form some form of infraction, really, on the Pension Reform Act and the Constitution?
Now, looking at the Pension Reform Act, for instance, there are strict requirements for the use of pension funds. And that can be seen in section 85 and 86 of how those pension funds can be used. And it's clearly demarcated for investments. Looking at the totality of what pension is and what it's meant to be, it's meant to be a kind of savings, a future sustenance, if I can call it that, for future workers both in the private and public sector. And it's clear in the spirit of the Pension Reform Act that it's basically for investments. And in purposes of investment by state and federal governments, the classes of bonds and securities that can be used is clearly provided in section 85 and 86 of the Pension Reform Act. And this is considered so important that the same Pension Reform Act 2014 in section 100 criminalizes and penalizes any kind of misuse or misappropriation of pension funds. And you will understand why pension funds is so important. It is the future of the working class, without which they have no, particularly within the context of what we're seeing in Nigeria, when mostly governors cannot afford to pay the minimum wage today. And so that clearly demarcates the responsibilities of government, even at the federal and the state level, to make sure that pension funds are left to be what they are. And look, going further into the various legislations that are enacted to guide loans, as it were, which is what we've seen these actions of the 33 governor to me. Look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, for instance, which is one of the principal legal frameworks that guides borrowing of government, all the three tiers of government. It clearly provides for that framework, including transparency and accountability, as to how borrowing must be done, if at all, by the federal and state governments, and the things that must be put in place. One of such things provided by the Fiscal Responsibility Act is what is called a cost-benefit analysis from any of the agencies of government that wants to borrow. And cost-benefit analysis in the simplest form is that layout that shows how those funds are to be used for critical infrastructure, who benefits, and how that benefit flows into that economic and financial policy of Nigeria. We are yet to see that, particularly within the context of what we've seen, how public funds have been managed, not in a transparent and accountable manner. And that creates the concern that SERAP has seen, to be sure that if at all, which we vehemently oppose, these funds are borrowed, as it were, there must be critical frameworks in place to make sure there is no misuse. And so, which guarantees do we have? And that's the ultimate question Nigeria should expect to hear from the federal government and the state government.
Now, I mean, moving back now, you recall that this began at the National Economic Council. You know, there was a meeting with the governors, and the governor of Kaduna State was designated to lead that committee to look into the possibility of drawing from pension funds. Now, it's at the realm of the NGF, and they've put that proposal out. So, clearly, the executive is not unaware of this. In fact, speaking, the president is not unaware of this. So, do you expect the president to reverse this proposal, since, I mean, it began with a meeting at the executive in the first place?
Yes, naturally, yes. We expect the president to do that. And again, it is within the various legislative frameworks that guide the issues of pension, which you would understand, looking at what it does, is very, very important. And that is why I believe that the drafters of the Pension Reform Act gives the power of the chairman of the NPC, which is the body created National Pension Commission, to regulate pension, says that the chairman of the commission reports directly and solely to the president. It is of such importance. And you will see even within the various frameworks in the Pension Reform Act, pension fund administrators and other companies and entities that would manage these funds by way of investments and remittances are regulated strictly with a strict regimen of various things that they should possess and the things they should not do. And so looking at the powers of the president to always act in the interest of Nigerians is part of the constitutional oath of office that the president took, along with the various international instruments that Nigeria has signed on as state party. Creates that obligation, not only morally, I must say, but legally on the president, to make sure that these funds that belongs to workers, which is their future, are not tampered with in any form. And more so within the legal framework, we've seen that has not been satisfied by the governors. And that is why SERAP has taken this to be sure that the president should be able to act in the interest of Nigerians to stop what we've seen as an infraction into the pension funds of Nigerian citizens.
Speaking of the governors, let's take a listen rather to the chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum speaking on this same issue.
So we have said the way to go is to look at options that would enable us to undertake infrastructure development by accessing funding from private sector. One such private sector funding is the pension fund, which is sitting in various pension finance administrators. And this money is already being borrowed by other elements. There is no reason why state governments cannot access it, especially when they're going to be making available an irrevocable standing payment order for it. The only attraction that we see in this, which brought us to this conclusion at the National Economic Council, is that it's going to be at a much more competitive, lower rate of about 9% for what we want to access from the pension fund, and 5% for what we want to access from the infra credit, which is a vehicle by the Central Bank of Nigeria, all private sector determined.
So Governor Kayode Fayemi of Ekiti State speaking about that proposal by the governors. Mr. Oluwadare, listening to Governor Fayemi, does that in some sense make this clearer? Does it give you some form of rest as to what this money will be used for?
I am not convinced. I'm not convinced. And that is particularly within the context of the absence of adherence to the strict legal frameworks that govern borrowing on one hand, and the other framework that governs use of pension funds, which is highlighted in our open letter to the president. We are yet to see that. And so, again, we can put this in context, Kayode. What is the nature of the project that these governors are going to apply these borrowed funds to? Those critical infrastructure, can they be said to be capital projects in line with the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act as the use of borrowed funds and loans? What are those measures in place that would assure Nigerians, particularly those whose pension funds have been used, that those funds will not go the way that previous loans, including the various fact allocations to the states, have gone? And what are those transparency and accountability elements to all these governors responsible, not only to the members of the state for providing what they've done, critical infrastructure, but also to Nigerians whose pension funds are being borrowed to be used on capital expenditure. Those are pertinent questions which the various legal frameworks under the Pension Reform Act 2014 and the Fiscal Responsibility Act provides, which we are yet to see from the statement of the governors. Again, looking at the clear provisions of Section 44 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, what is the cost-benefit analysis? What is the benefit of this so-called infrastructure, the use of the loans to the average Nigerian? How does it improve their socio-economic status?
Right. Mr. Oluwadare, here's what we'll do. I mean, we'll have to go on a break now, but when we return, we'll take a look at the options available if the governors say, well, this is a proposal we're following through with, and some other issues in a moment. Please stay with us. You're welcome back to the program. Let's rejoin Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, who is the Deputy Director at SERAP, discussing the NGF's proposal to access pension funds in Nigeria for infrastructure development. Thank you for staying with us on the program. Now, looking at that open letter you wrote to the President, I mean, the proposal by the Nigeria Governors Forum mentioned NSIA specifically and talked about that infrastructure fund. But you're asking the President to stop PENCOM, at least to speak to PENCOM and stop them. So why not also involve the NSIA in this? Because it would seem this is the vehicle through which the NGF is trying to access the pension funds.
No. If the President exercises the authorities he has over the National Pension Commission from releasing the funds being contrary to the provisions of Section 85 and 6 of the Pension Reform Act on the use of the pension funds, then naturally, whether they come from, whether they apply to the CBN by ways of stocks and bonds, or whether through the NSIA, they would not arise. And that is the brunt of our argument. We also, in the same letter, copied the Attorney General of the Federation, who is the Chief Law Officer, should be able to provide that much legal advice to the President to see why this is not in compliance with the laws of the land and not in the interest of Nigerians. And so, with the exercise of such powers by the President, those other issues, of course, will not be required and will not arise at all.
I think it was in 2017 that the Nigeria Sovereign Wealth Fund, of course, which is under the NSIA, actually set up a company in partnership with a London-based local currency guarantee firm to enable pension funds to invest in Nigeria infrastructure bonds. So, literally, technically speaking, this was in the works a while ago. But let's look at some of the the options moving forward. Just in case this proposal moves on, what are the options available for SERAP, maybe pensioners and workers in Nigeria who say we don't want any part of this?
This is one of those advocacy initiatives by way of advisory that SERAP undertakes from time to time, able to contribute to the progress of Nigeria and the democratic practice. So naturally, when this kind of advocacy fails, we just as common Nigerians have a resort to the court, and judiciary would believe we're able to agree with us, particularly looking at the various legal frameworks which support our argument. And we really believe that the law is on our side, and we will be constrained to go to court in simple terms if the President does not follow our advice.
Well, just before we round off on this conversation, the DMO has stipulations for domestic borrowing for states, like ensuring that their total amount of loans outstanding at any particular time, including the proposed loan, shall not exceed 50%. You've also mentioned PENCOM. So clearly you say there are laws that go against this. So are you saying that the governors will be breaking the law, literally, if they go ahead with this?
Of course. We said that in clear terms, they will. And that is why we said that in writing to the President, we copied the Attorney General of the Federation, stating clearly our arguments and the various legal frameworks that go against what the government is doing by way of the Pension Reform Act, constitutional provisions, and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Hoping that what we see as a breach of these laws will be made on the board by timely advice from the Attorney General to the President. And so we're allowed to happen.
Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare, Deputy Director, SERAP, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the program tonight.
Thank you very much, Howard.